is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He said, Hambone, you're going to run out of jokes before 2E runs out of books, and he was right. Stu Horvath.
There's a lot of 2B books, man.
And we're going to talk about another one today.
Yeah, well, actually, we're going to take care of a whole bunch. I think get rid of a full dozen.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's get started then. We got a laundry list. Sounds like.
So we're going to talk about Monstrous Arcana. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the reverse dungeon.
Right.
And I mentioned how much I kind of turned my nose up at a lot of the late second edition releases for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Partly that's just because I was, we're talking like 95, 96. I'm graduating high school, going into college.
Right.
My head is elsewhere.
Yeah.
But partly because, at the end of 2E, I think that everybody kind of had that, oh my God, more books. Kind of like there was just so many books. I think that it was impossible to kind of keep up and be engaged with them. So you naturally are sort of just like, this can't possibly be good.
Right.
And because of that feeling has lingered. And I just sort of kind of miss out on a lot of this stuff that is actually pretty good.
Really?
Yeah. Monstrous Arcana, pretty cool.
Well, I mean, in fairness, a monster book is always going to be better than any other book,
Yeah.
On paper, in principle, and in execution, because in the end of the day, everybody loves a monster.
It's true. And these are some classics that get covered in the series. And this kind of harkens back to an age-old tradition in Dungeons & Dragons, the Ecology Articles that were in Dragon Magazine.
Oh, yes.
Whenever you bring up the Ecology Articles, that's the reaction. It's like, oh, yeah, man, those are so good. The idea being that a lot of these monsters are weird, and we're going to write articles that sort of give you a little bit more detail on the monsters, their behavior, their physiology. And in learning about how they live and how they act, you gain insight how to run them. And usually it was in sort of like a prose story form. They were just really approachable, and they gave you deep dives into the cool monsters. I think the very first Ecology article was on the Piercer. And that's sort of like the perfect way to start, because it's like, what on earth is this thing that drops on you from the ceiling? Like, why does it exist? How does it exist? Like, what you just need to know more about the Piercer, because in the monster manual, it's basically just a trap, right? It's like a trap monster. One attack, it's like a gotcha, and then that's it. But when you put in the context of the Ecology article, you get a lot more and how it lives in the environment of these like fantasy undergrounds.
Right.
And that's cool. So this is sort of an extension of that. The second edition had delved into this a little bit. I mean, the Ecology series of articles was ongoing in Dragon Magazine, I think even until third edition. But in official publications, one of the big changes in the Monstrous Compendium was the addition of every monster got a full page. So there was a little bit more room. So you did get like a little bit of a breakdown about their ecology and their society if they were intelligent, but still only a couple paragraphs. Then in a little later, there was the box set Elminster's Ecologies, which does the same basic thing, except specific to Forgotten Realms. I'm not super keen on Forgotten Realms generally, but I really like that box set because it really shows you how you could kind of like key monsters into, a specific setting. That specificity is really neat. And then there's the Monstrous Arcana books, which I will tell you about now. Preamble over. They start in 1996. There's sort of three waves. The first wave is all about the Beholder. So the first book is called ITyrant, and now that's like I Claudius, not EYE. It's just the letter I.
Or like iPhone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because our listenership is really on the I Claudius tip,
I mean, have you been in the Discord? I think many of them are.
So, and of course, it's a play on words because, they are also called iTyrants, as in eyeball tyrants. Beholders, super weird. Never really got a good explanation about what they are or what they're doing and how they live and what they think about, what they do in their time off.
Well, I mean, the way that they're portrayed in D&D, they're just flying wrecking balls.
And they don't have hands. So like they're intelligent, but how do they function as a society without hands?
I mean, it's kind of hard to flip the bird when you don't have a hand, but at the same time, one of those eye stalks definitely means F you if you end up on the business end of the wrong one.
So ITyrant is basically like a wide-ranging look at the beholder as a creature, their culture, their society, their outlook, their goals, how they function, specific magic items that they've created, their physiology, everything. It's kind of great because it's like serious. This is the definitive work on beholders, which is just like inherently like ridiculous to me. Like the more serious you go with this sort of thing, like the more it entertains me because like it makes me laugh because you're talking about like floating orbs of death as if like it's a thing and it's not.
Well, you know, I always say that D&D books are like textbooks. They're like college level textbooks with the amount of information that you find inside. So I, for one, am not surprised that they decided to go academic with this route of education on the beholder, as it were.
Yeah, and it's absurd, and I love it. And the absurdity comes from that straight-laced kind of approach. The nice thing about that kind of absurdity is that like it really kind of underscores the fact that this isn't necessarily canon. This isn't necessarily canon around your table anyway, but this is sort of the first kind of indication that D&D is really interested in creating a kind of canonicity for their, you know, creations. I don't know how much this is still canon. I don't care because that's not something that I'm interested in. But if not the details, the approach is something that gets carried forward. We'll talk about that in a second. So iTyrant is great. My favorite part is the fact that they have these little things that they could ride in. They're either like enchanted like golem legs, torso things that they kind of like plop into like a Krang.
Oh my God.
Or or they also have like an undead version of that too. That's like carved out of like a ghoul or something. It's so good. It's like so delightfully stupid. Like, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you talk about canon, but like when they change and update editions like every, I don't know, like what's it, like a decade between editions or so, like after you got past second edition?
Yeah, give or take.
Yeah, so like it's canon in the same way that like comic stories are canon. Like, well, this is the Bronze Age, it's the Silver Age, it's the Golden Age. It's like, well, what happened in the Golden Age? You know, it still kind of carries over, but not really, because now we're going to forget about this. Like Batman used to shoot people, but that was a thing that happened. We don't do that anymore. Yeah. He does not kill, staunchly against it. Now it's like, oh yeah, Batman will kill anybody gets his way. He will cripple you within an inch of your life. You will never recover from the mountain of hospital bills that you are going to incur by trying to steal that candy bar around Batman. You know, like, but it's canon, but it's like canon per se.
Yeah, canon for right now. Again, like I can't really get into details on these books because like I don't know which version of the beholder it is. Like I have so many different versions of the beholder in my head, and they all are kind of clashing. They are all both true and false at the same time. It's a weird state of affairs.
Yeah.
It really addresses like a monster that is incredibly hard to comprehend with any kind of like reasonability. There's just no context in which like a random person is going to be able to come up with like a good explanation for the beholder as they are presented in the Monstrous Compendium or Monster Manual. They're just super weird. And that's part of their appeal. So I think that some people might think that this is a demystification and not like it because of that. I think it's a lot of fun. What's weird though to me is that the next one in the series is the Sahuagin, which I don't know if this was always the plan. I know that the book almost got canceled when TSR went bankrupt, but it was basically finished when that happened. So when Wizards swooped in and bought the company and continued to operate it as TSR, that was one of the first books that got put out, which is called The Sea Devils. I just don't get me wrong. I think that the book is cool on the same level. I just don't think that the Sahuagin necessarily merited this kind of deep dive into them. They are basically fish people, I guess they're recontextualized a little bit here to become shark people. And this is also the first time you see the Sahuagin barons with the 4 arms, which I love. I think that's just like a great design choice. And I was surprised when I was flipping through this book to see that. But like, I don't know. I feel like there's just so much more pop culture touchstones for like fish person. The beholder lacks, you know, like, you know, the deep ones from Lovecraft. You got the creature from the Black Lagoon, like, and it's just like fish people. They're people, but fish. Like you could just understand them on a way that is just easier, I think. That said, there's still a lot of cool stuff in the book. It does the same thing. You get a wide view of this society, what they do, why they're constantly being bad, which kind of goes to their shark-like natures. They're constantly swimming, constantly eating. There's like this refrain that like meat is meat, the constant hunger, which is cool. But again, and also another strike against this book, I always think the underwater level sucks. Like I hate underwater adventures. I hate the underwater levels in Super Mario Brothers. It's like, it's a gimmick that never like delivers for me. And so I'm just always going to be like,
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to keep that intensity alive when you're literally doing a little doggy paddle, trying not to drown in all these games. I appreciate it though. I do appreciate it because you have 2 trains of thought. I think you have the people who are going to read it and be like, oh man, that's cool. Like, Sean Dillon, our friend, who's like the living, breathing monster manual. He's like, oh man,
yeah.
Did you know these guys do this? Like he's going to look at it like, I just smoked a joint and I watched Shark Week from beginning to end. And now I know all this stuff that is useless in any other context. But man, let me tell you something about Sahuagin. And then, you have people who will probably be running this being like, wow, now I feel like I finally unlocked and can grok the underwater level. Now I can like run this like really deep, rich adventure that my player is going to do exactly the opposite of what they want them to. But man, the backstory is going to be thick. I appreciate it from both sides of the spectrum.
Like I said, I don't dislike this book, but it's just not my favorite. And I'm just a little vaguely puzzled by it. Like why people were so hot to do Sahuagin next, especially considering who the subject of the 3rd book is, which is Mind Flayers, a monster that has a mile-long mystique, not a lot of answers. Like they're a little bit hard to understand, like what they do, why they do it. Unlike the Sahuagin, which, like I said, they're people, but fish. Yeah, so the Ilithiad, which is a play on the Iliad, I guess.
I buy it.
I understand it, but I don't understand it. Like, why? It sounds cool too, so whatever. And this is basically, again, a lot of the stuff that we take for granted about Mind Flayers going forward is originally presented here, like the whole idea of like them being tadpoles, the elder brain, a lot of the variants, like the undead Mind Flayers, the way they're born. I think that I'm 95% sure that this is where you get like the tadpole that gets inserted into like a humanoid victim and it like mutates them into Mind Flayers.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that the hatred of the sun and trying to turn off the sun is also in this book for the first time. Again, though, and this is probably a good place to segue. I'm not sure of the details. I've read this book, but I've also read the Lords of Madness book in 3rd edition, which basically does the same thing, but with like slightly different details for a whole bunch of monsters. So like, this is very much like in the interest of what 3rd edition is all going to do with D&D. They did books like this in 4th edition, primarily for the demons and devils, just that deep dive into lore. And like one of the illustrations in the Ilithiad is like a Mind Flayer on the autopsy table, vivisected, so you can see all their weird organs.
Yeah,
I love that. It's so stupid. I don't need that. I never am going to need that in my game, but I love seeing it because it brings like a level of imaginative detail to the world that is just like unprecedented. Like nobody does that. Because nobody needs it. But like the fact that they did that here, it's great. And it also ties into Spelljammer stuff too. The richness that they could bring to it is really special and fun.
The one thing I think is missing from any book like this, and it's something that like me personally, as now a game designer, am very interested in. It's like, how did you come to this? Like I appreciate Appendix N, but I would want to like ask the guy who made the Beholder up and be like, so how did you get there, bro? And have him tell me something like, yeah, like took acid for the first time and put on King Crimson, Starless, and Bible Black. And this is what I ended up with because I would believe it.
The Beholder is so special too. Like, it's just so like out of like, I think Mind Flayers are probably like up there for me in terms of like the classic monsters, but the Beholder is so weirdly iconic. It was in a version of it was in Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, it was
like so odd, but cool. There's something cool about floating sphere flesh ball things with eyes. I don't know. It's a truism about the human experience, I guess.
I guess it is true. And also, like, in no matter what form it shows up in, you know, it's bad news. Like, nothing with that many eyes is here to like bring you a housewarming gift.
For sure.
You know, for sure. Studio, any final thoughts on Monstrous Arcana?
I do. Sort of an important one. Each of these source books, which are sort of lavishly illustrated, full color, I don't believe that there was really a precedent for that. I feel like this was a new kind of experiment in format for TSR at the time too, but all of them front a trilogy of adventures. So they give you all of this information and then they put it into action in 3 modules for each monster, which is just like, it feels like a teaching tool or something like an education packet. I really love it. And I think it works really well. I think that was a good approach to design.
Yeah. And I'm sure that the water level one was the one that sold the least, but check out iTyrant.
There you go. Yeah. No, they are all suitably ridiculous. I do like the Sahuagin ones least. And I think I like the Beholder ones most. Your mileage will vary. They're cool. You should check them out. They're all on drive-through, cheap, and they're all on eBay, not cheap. So
yeah, unless you're a hardcore collector, go with option A.
Yeah.
Well, this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you on the internet?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, where I'm going to be posting about all of the Monstrous Arcana books in 2023. And I know that because I'm a lunatic. Why am I doing the 2023 posts already? God.
Because you are like studious and like to get your work done ahead of time, so you know how to scramble. And I appreciate that about you.
Because I'm like a shark. I can't stop. Like a shark person.
Oh, geez.
Now I got my source book. Oh, geez. I
don't even know anymore. You can find me across the internet on social media at John McGuire RPG, on the Twitter, on the TikTok, and on the Instagram. I'm mostly on Instagram. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. If you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerepg. We got early release episodes. We got a behind the scenes look at my game 3-2-1 action. We got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book, which is called
Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground, a guide to tabletop role-playing games from Dungeons & Dragons to Mothership.
And also whatever other things Stu's working on as well. We have a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. We are starting to run games for our patrons, finally being able to do that. I'm psyched about. This month, I'm running a DCC module. I've got 3 to choose from, and we're going to be having some fun with that. And we got more fun stuff in the works as well for our patrons. Patreon.com/vintagerepg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.